What's up everyone? Lance Hedrick here, and today I'm going to show you how to make gooey espresso. What is espresso? Well, if we go back to the very earliest phases of espresso, it was essentially a watery beverage with really hot water that was passing through grounds using steam pressure, essentially. Then this dates back to the 19th century. And then, of course, we have Moriando in the late 1800s patenting this idea of an espresso machine, though there were certainly previous iterations that were similar, but even still, that's the first kind of recorded patent. Even though they were using a portafilter, it wasn't creating the crema, it wasn't creating that really concentrated beverage, and that would be kind of the status quo of what espresso was until the 1940s. In 1948, we have Achille Gaggia coming through and making a spin off of the Cremonese screw group patent, creating the first lever machine. Now, with the advent of this new lever machine that is capable of much higher pressure and capable of making what we now know as crema, there was a marked shift in the understanding and the presentation and the preparation of espresso. It went from a bit bigger beverage, similar to what a cafe creme is nowadays, where you're running hot water with a really low pressure over coffee grounds, to a much more concentrated beverage that was able to be pulled relatively quickly with a thick head of cream or of foam that sat on top. Now, of course, this foam looked out of the ordinary for people who were used to their coffees, that were hanging out at coffee houses at the time, and in order to make it a more expected type of phenomenon, they would call it the creme, like they put it on their espresso machines, that this was a creme machine, something capable of making that foamy head. And then it became a necessary part of the espresso experience. But even from 1948 until now, we have lots of different modes of how to make this espresso. Not only did we have the spring lever, but we also have the direct piston, which I have right here, the Gaggia Gilda, which is capable of 9 bar by using your arm. We also have the hydraulic group, which was using a different way of achieving that high pressure to replicate that crema. And over the years, we got the pump-driven in 1961 with the E61 group, and now we have lots of other different ways nowadays, whether it's the Nomad with the little seesaw type of thing going on, or whether it's the Wakeco Pico Presso where we have a little button on the side. There are loads of ways of achieving that pressure. But the one kind of understanding with espresso today is that it is requiring a much higher pressure. But outside of that, there is no real stable definition of what espresso actually is. We look at the SCA, the Specialty Coffee Association, and for the longest time, they kind of defined it as a very specific volume, a very specific time, very specific pressure, with a very specific presentation in the cup. If you go to a cafe and ask for an espresso, you could have anywhere from a very weak diluted type of espresso that might be pulled at a 1:4 ratio with a low temperature water, all the way up to a 1 to 1.5 ratio where it's very thick and concentrated. And those are two completely different beverages, but they're named the same thing. I'm going to put some polls out, so pay attention to the socials and you know, engage with them. That would be great. But I want to understand maybe a new way that we can refer to espresso so we know what we're talking about. I tend to prefer really light roasted coffees, but I do enjoy the occasional darker roasted coffee, what a lot of people online might call charcoal. Now, the great thing about darker roasted coffees is, honestly, everything matters a lot less. As coffee gets lighter, it becomes a lot more difficult to extract, and consistency, efficiency, all these things become a much bigger issue. The darker you get, the more brittle the coffee, the more easy it is to extract, and the much bigger error margin you have. Water temperature matters a lot less the darker the coffee is. Your grinder particle distribution matters a lot less when you have really dark coffee. Notice, I'm not saying doesn't matter. That is not true, but it matters less. And that's a good thing. You don't need to worry nearly as much about the cost of your grinder, the particle size distribution, yada, 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 the darker your coffee gets. Does it help? Absolutely. But is it as big of a deal? Absolutely not. What machine do I need to get really good crema? Any of them will give you great crema if you're using a dark enough and freshly enough bean. Take really fresh Italian roasted coffee that is, 2 days off roast. I could grind it in a mortar and pestle and I could get crema. That's how easy crema is to achieve. Crema is not the marker of a good espresso. Instead, the corollary is true. The lack of crema when you're drinking a dark roast coffee is the marker of a crappy espresso. So today I'm using the Gaggia Classic E24 with the brass boiler inside. I'm going to do a little temp surf, but nothing crazy. I'm going to be using what is my current favorite dark roasted coffee, which is from a Neapolitan roaster called Saka. It's their Crema Gran coffee. I quite like it. It's chocolatey. It's got a bitterness at the end, but it's most reminiscent of like a bitter chocolate. It is very thick. The creaminess of it is insane. It's very light when you first have a sip, and then it gets a little thicker, and it kind of matches what I want. It's not super dark. There's no oils on it, but it is definitely a darkly roasted coffee. Of course, there's great options all around the world when it comes to this. This is just what I have found that I enjoy, because when you get to this dark of a roast, normally roasters aren't as careful, and you tend to get lots of really bitter, dark, like not very good tasting things. And so I've found it pretty difficult to find a really solid darker roasted coffee. This is one I specifically enjoy, so we'll be using that in today's video. Now, whenever we're brewing darker roasted coffees, I think a few things are very, very important. Typically, we do quicker shots with these light roasted coffees to really push the acidity. Well, in a darker roasted coffee, there's not that much acidity to get, so you don't really need to worry about it. The coarser you can grind your coffee, even with dark roast, the better it's going to be. The coarser you grind, the more even the water can roll through it. The coarser you grind, the more crema will come out of it. Now, if you go really fine, a lot of that crema is not going to be able to form and escape from that puck, because the water is not going to flow evenly through the puck, and you're going to notice a lot less. Don't believe me? Go even finer on your coffee, run a 40-second shot, run a 50-second shot, run a 60-second shot, and you're going to see the crema lessen and lessen and lessen as that shot time elongates. I tend to prefer 22, 23, 24, maybe 25-second shots in order to get my 1-to-2 ratio, or just a bit less. And then I'm just playing from there. Managing your headspace. I like to reduce headspace as much as possible to really emphasize that texture. We don't want to underfill it, because that defeats the majority purpose of drinking a darker coffee, which is that lovely texture, airy crema that's really light, really fluffy on your tongue when you first take a sip, and then turns into kind of syrup and chocolate as it goes down. You are overfilling if when you put it in before you start the shot and then you pull it out. If there's a screw indent, sure. But before you start the shot and there's no screw indent, but there is one after you pull your shot, that's just because the pressure released and it exploded up, and that's fine. Don't worry about it. This is a puck that can handle about 21 grams, so I'm going to fill 21 grams in here. It's going to be freshly ground. I'm going to tamp it down. We're going to pull a shot, and then we're going to taste and see what changes might need to be made. So let's get right on it. Naked portafilters are liars sometimes. So if you draw conclusions erroneously from a naked portafilter and conclude there is no channeling, there is no heterogeneous extraction, that's just silly. Let's not think like that. We do still need to pay a bit of attention to the puck preparation, though again, it doesn't matter nearly as much as with lighter roasted coffees. And we will tear it and start the shot. Nice. And look at that. Just thick and creamy. And it's pulling at a good rate. Let's get up to about a little squirt there, but we're good. Boom. All right. There we go. 40 grams out in about 25 seconds. And look at that. I mean, that's all frickin' foam. That is so thick. It is insane. Now we can stir it up. We can take the Daddy Hoff spoon. Okay, we can stir that up. And that is so freaking thick. Oh my Lanta. Okay. With that, lots of caramels, lots of bitter chocolate. It's got just an indelible thickness about it. It's like thick and airy. And so delicious. Now what we can do with this is we can improve the thickness by just shortening our shot. So say everything the same, and we could stop it earlier. We can increase the amount that comes out by letting it run longer. Or if we wanted to have it maybe even more airy, maybe if we had it and it tasted too thick or too heavy on the tongue, we could coarsen the grind size and let it run in 20 or 21 seconds. The darker it goes, the less you have to worry about under extraction and the acidity that accompanies it typically with lighter coffees. You can do a 19-second shot, get the most like airy texture of all time that feels like it's whipped cream on your tongue. Don't have to worry about being shot with acidity. If you think you are experiencing more acid issues because something tastes more acidic, that's not actually chemically true. You have just as much acidity present in a darker roast as you do with a lighter roast. It just may not be as palatable. This is something we've talked about in a previous video with Dr. Samo Smirke, the chemist out in Zurich. There is the same amount of acidity in both. They just present themselves differently. So after we pull our shot, we can sit there, taste it, and we can figure out what direction we want to go in. Now for that one for me was really well balanced. I think I could shorten the shot a bit and actually maybe enjoy it a bit more, because with that one, the crema was really nice, but the body was actually a bit too, there was a bit too much wateriness going on. So when I was tasting it, it was a bit more bland than maybe I would have liked. I think the texture was great. It wasn't acrid. It didn't have intense bitterness, but overall, I think that there was a bit more wiggle room in shortening the shot. So when you're sitting there and you're critiquing your espresso, the first thing you need to make sure of is that you are getting your parameters roughly exact. So with these darker roasted coffees, when you're doing an Italian style, I would recommend staying within those typical parameters that were originally set out by the SCA. Maybe throw out the volume, but the ratio and the time is a pretty decent way to start. Their time that they suggested was 20 to 30 seconds, and the ratio was around a 1-to-2 ratio. I'm not messing with my grind size. I think the grind size is pretty much perfect. I'm just messing with the output or the ratio. I'm going to pull out about 36 this time. So a pretty substantial jump, about 5-6 grams down. And it will also correlate with the time. The time will be lesser, of course. Please make sure you hit the like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Leave comments down below and we'll chat about this more in depth. But let's get this shot pulled. All right, we pulled about 35 grams out in around 22 seconds. I mean, look at that. Fills this cup up perfectly. Still super light because how much crema there is on top. I mean, look at that. Thick. All right. So we made it thicker, more concentrated. We probably bumped the TDS at least a percentage by lessening the amount of lower concentrated espresso coming out. So much more vibrant. There is more of an acidity here, of course, because we pulled lower. Balance is still there, and there's actually a bit of stone fruit popping out. But wow. That's just really enjoyable. This is definitely a reflection of what people actually talk about when they refer to their Italian dream experience. In reality, I've been to Italy many times. I've done consulting trips out there, lots of traveling. It is very rare I have an espresso I do enjoy. When you go to these shops, they tend to have, grinders that have been overlooked with cleaning, espresso machines that haven't been backflushed very often, coffee that's pre-ground sitting in the dosing chamber. They don't pay too much attention. They just kind of dose it out and go. And you get thick crema, really thick crema, but it's because they're using heavy Robusta blends that allow for crema much more easily. They're a bit harsher. They have a more acrid finish. There's a lot of astringency. It's not the greatest thing, but what's happening, though, is we have a common understanding of what the ideal espresso in Italy really should be, and that is this idea of rich, thick, creamy, chocolatey, caramelly, toffee, whatever it might be. And we can get that by being a little more careful with our coffee selection, with our coffee storage, with our grinding, with our tamping, with our distribution, with our approach to recipes to try and dial that in for ourselves. So if you're wanting to have that kind of espresso romantic dream in your own home, it's very simple. Source good beans, grind it well, and then really pay attention to the dialing process. I hope this video was helpful. If you need further information, I have loads of other dialing in videos that go more intense into the process, but hopefully this was helpful for those of you who already know how to pull espresso and just want to hone in that perfect Italian style spro. But anyway, thank you for watching. Again, make sure to hit the like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, let me finish this. I hope that you brew something tasty today, and cheers.